Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin, daf Kafdala. This week's learning is sponsored by Sarah Avrik in loving memory of her mother, Leah Shifrin Avrik, Leah Bat Yehuda Leib, Heikel, V'chaya Masha. She infused her many descendants with her love for Torah, Israel, and the Jewish people. Today's daf is sponsored for Refuah Shlema for Tinok, Ben Sheva, V'Avraham. Okay, we're going to get started. I'll remind everyone, I mentioned the other day that the Sukkah Challenge is beginning on June 1st, so you can spread it around, and it'll take everyone through the summer. Okay, not a little bit longer than the other challenges, but have the summer, and for some people that's a better time, for some people it might not be a good time. You can always pick up at the next challenge, but if you want to get others involved and learning, you can send it around. Everything was sent out by WhatsApp, by email, and it's also found on our website. Okay, we're going to get started with, go back to the beginning, to Kaf Gimel Amud Bet at the bottom. We'll start again with the Mishna. Or the truth is we'll start with the braita because the braita just repeats the Mishna but in more detail. So Tanu Rabbanan, Para b'shchita kshera ba'arifa psula. So we're going to compare para, aduma, and egla, arufa. Okay, we're in a series of Mishnayot that we're going to compare two things that are basically mutually exclusive. The way to do one is only for that one and not for the other one. And then each time we go to a braita which details what the differences are and explains why through a kohanim you might have thought that it would be relevant for both. And you need a pasuk to teach you, no, that's not the case. So that's exactly what we're doing right now. So a para aduma, the red heifer, is slaughtered, but cannot be arifad, which basically means breaking the back of the neck. Egla, ba'arifa kshera b'shchita psula. And the egla arufa, we discussed already last class what it is, I'm not going to go through again, but it can only be by breaking the back of the neck. But b'shchita psula, you can't slaughter the animal. Okay, it's not what we do. Nimtzet kasher b'para pasul be'egla, kasher be'egla pasul b'para. Okay, so basically what's good for one doesn't work for the other. Here goes our kavachomer again. Why don't we say the para is kshera ba'arifa, that you can basically break the back of the neck of the para aduma. Why wouldn't that work? Because if we take a kavachomer, we would say like this: Uma egla shelo kshera b'shchita kshera ba'arifa. Now, if the egla arufa, you can't do slaughtering, but you can do breaking the back of its neck. So para shukshera b'shchita, inodin shukshera ba'arifa. Okay, so wouldn't you then say, it would be obvious then, a para, which you can do shchita, and when you can't do shchita, you can do arifa. So wouldn't you think then that the para, you can do also shchita and also arifa, because it already includes something that wasn't included in the other case, and therefore we'll assume it includes both. So, now we're going to have a pasuk that's going to tell us, no. From this pasuk we're going to learn, not the case, just like we saw in the previous sugya. Amar Kra, Vishachat, so by para aduma it says you're supposed to slaughter, and it also says v'chuka, where it says say chuka in the whole beginning of the section. Parshat chukat, if you don't remember, right? Para aduma appears in Parshat chukat. Zot chukat haTorah. It says chok. Chok means only this way. Okay, so because it says v'shachat, you slaughter the para aduma, and then it says chuka. Actually, before it doesn't really matter the order. But because it says chuka, from there you learn b'shchita im barifa lo. Only shchita, not arifa. However, the Gemara is going to question this, and they're going to reject this. Or the truth is, we'll have a question in the Gemara about this. It doesn't make sense. So they're going to have to find a different answer. V'chol hecha. Now it's going to be a little long-winded to get to how we reject this. A little complicated, I would say. Wait, if it says chukah, we can't make a kavachomer to say maybe this isn't the only way to do it, maybe there's an alternative way. That's not true. Look at Yom Kippur. Okay, Yom Kippurim, okay, there it says it at the end of the section. V'zot v'ayta zot lachem lechukat olam. Okay, this is for you forever, right? A chok. Okay, right? It's kind of a statute. Lechaper al bnei Israel. This is how you're going to atone for the Jewish people. So it says chukah. Now the jump is going to be, if it says chukah, you would assume from what we just said, it's the only way to do it. Now, we don't know which aspect we're talking about, the avodah Yom Kippurim, but we are going to see that it's the only way to do it, but it's not going to be because of the word chukah. That's why it's a little complicated. Because in the end, we are going to say that there's something in avodah Yom Kippurim that's the only way to do it. It's going to be what we call the goral, okay, where we take a goral, we do a lottery, we take 2 seirim, 2 goats, and we put them up in the Beit HaMikdash with lottery. One goes to Hashem and one goes to Azazel, right? One becomes a korban on the Mizbeach and the other one gets thrown off a cliff. So we're going to see that the goral is essential and it's the only way it can be done. You can't do it any other way. And we're going to see that it's not learned from the word chukah, it's learned from a different word. That's going to be the whole premise. That were it not for that other word, it seems like you could. Now, what's complicated about it is in the end, it really can only be done in one way, but not because of the word chukah. That's the basic premise of what we're going to do right now. But let's get into it, and then we'll summarize at the end, and you'll see. Vitanya. So, firstly, we have to say that Yom Kippurim, it says chukah. Then there's a braita that says v'hasau chatat. And you make that se'ir, the one that goes la Hashem, as a chatat. You bring it as a sin offering. Ha-goral oseh chatat, ve'en Hashem oseh chatat. The drasha is, what determines that this one is the one that's going to be a chatat? The goral, the lottery, not Hashem. What does Hashem mean? Calling it by name. If I take the two se'irim, the two goats that I bring to the mikdash, and I say, this one's going to Hashem, and this one's going to Azazel, that doesn't determine it. Okay, they're not determined at that point that this is the one for the sacrifice. I have to do the goral. But again, where is it learned from in the end? It's learned from Asau Chatat. But this isn't enough, because what we want to basically show is that you could have made a Kal V'chomer and argued that you could do it by Kriyat Shem from a Kal V'chomer from a different scenario. And then we're going to need the pasuk to say, no, you can't do the Kal V'chomer. And then again, the whole point is, we tried to say, because it says chukah and chukat, that teaches you can't do the Kal V'chomer. And because it says chukah, this is the only way, and don't learn some other method from a Kal V'chomer. But in our case, they're learning from Asau Chatat and not from chukah. And that's going to be the issue. But let's see the Kal V'chomer. Shechova halo dinhu. You might have thought we could make a Kal V'chomer argument here. Umad b'makom shelo kidesh hagoral kidesh Hashem. There's a different scenario where which animal goes for which sacrifice is determined not by a goral, and not only is it not determined by a goral, but if you determine it by a goral, you can undo it very easily. It's an irrelevant. You could do it the way you determined it, but you can also switch. It's not a problem. And yet, kidesh Hashem. By calling it by name, that's what determines. What are we talking about? If you remember the pairs of birds that we bring to the temple, we just talked about Torim and Bnei Yonah. So, when you're, let's say, a yoledet, you gave birth, you're supposed to bring, or you bring an animal, and but I won't get into all the things, the options, but the second option is if you can't afford the first sacrifice that has an animal in it, you bring 2 birds. One is a sin offering and one is a burnt offering. Now, when you bring that pair of birds, how does it become determined which goes for which? First of all, the owner could do it or the Kohen could do it. But it's determined by calling it by name, by saying, this is an ola, this is a chatat, right? This is the one I'm bringing as an ola, this is the one as chatat. Okay, this burnt offering, this sin offering, not by a goral. If you do it by goral, you can always just switch it. If you do it by calling it by name, you can't switch it anymore. This one's already designated as an ola. That is a sin offering. You can't switch them around. Okay? So, if we have a place shelo kidesh hagoral and kidesh Hashem, where the goral doesn't do anything, and yet calling it by name does something, you can see where the Kal V'chomer is going to go now. Makom shekidesh hagoral, so a place where the goral works and is effective, ein odin shekidesh Hashem. What do you think? Also calling it by name would be effective. Talmud lomar v'asau chatat hagoral oseh chatat ve'en Hashem oseh chatat. Now we go back to the beginning of the braita. What tells us don't take this Kal V'chomer, even though the Kal V'chomer could have worked? The words v'asau chatat. Now that's the key. Ta'ama decapitated v'asau chatat. Halav hachi darshinan Kal V'chomer. It's only because of the words asau chatat, do the one that you did in the goral as a chatat. That's what teaches you the lottery is what determines and nothing else. And that overrides the Kal V'chomer. But the word chukah alone, if you just had chukah and you didn't have asau chatat, we wouldn't have learned this. That's their assumption. Which means that the word chukah can't override this Kal V'chomer. Okay, so knock that out, and now they're going to explain a different drasha. I just want to point out, methodologically, we were trying to prove, I don't know if it's a methodological point, but it's a point about the structure here. We were trying to prove that para aduma can't be done by arufa, only by shchita. We tried to prove it from the psukim about the para aduma. In the end, we're going to learn the para aduma can't be done by arufa, And we're going to learn that the egla arufa can't be done by shlita, both from verses from the egla arufa section. In the end, it's not going to be from verses in the para aduma. It's going to be the red heifer section, but it's from verses of the egla arufa. Mi'e rachmana gabe egla ha'arufa. Because it says by the egla arufa, it says the egla ha'arufa. Now, he'ayidiyah, both in egla and both in arufa, even though grammatically that might be the correct way to do it. But they darshan ha'arufa, that's coming to limit. Zot ba'arifa ve'en acheret ba'arifa. So the way you learn that the para aduma can't be done by arifa is by the egla arufa itself. There it says only, it doesn't say that, but the drasha is only this can be done by arifa. Nothing else can be done by breaking the back of the neck. Now, so that was all a very long way of just getting to. How do we know that even though theoretically you can make a kavachomer argument that if in a case where you can't slaughter and you can do arifa, maybe in a case where you can slaughter, you can also do arifa? No. Egla ha'arufa, this is the only time you do arifa. Now we have to figure out, how do we know you can't slaughter the egla arufa also? So, tehei egla kshera b'shchita mikavachomer. Again, we're going to say, like we keep saying, is, we can make a kavachomer argument then, based on what we know now, that a regular para aduma can be slaughtered, but not arifad, right? Not breaking the back of the neck. So the place where you can break the back of the neck, wouldn't you think also you could slaughter it? So tehei egla kshera b'shchita mikavachomer. Ma para shelo kshera b'arifa kshera b'shchita. The para aduma you can't do arifa, and yet you can do shchita. So egla shekshera ba'arifa, so this egla that you can do arifa, ein odin shekshera b'shchita. Wouldn't you think that you could use shchita also? Amarkra, a different ha, again the ha'yidiyah, which is the definitive, right? It makes it definitive. Amarkra, va'arfu ha'egla. They do arifa to the egla. Ba'arifa in b'shchita lo. So from there you learn specifically arifa, no other way of doing it. Okay, this ends our para aduma and egla arufa. Now we're on to the next Mishna. Okay, we have two of these today. The end of the daf we'll have another one. Kasher b'kohanim, and as in the end we're going to cover three topics. Okay, the para aduma and the egla arufa. Now we're going to go to kohanim and Leviim, and then we're going to go to how vessels contract impurity. Kasher b'kohanim pasul b'Leviim, kasher b'Leviim pasul b'kohanim. Okay, just like the other Mishnayot, they don't tell us what's what, but there's something that's disqualified that's good for kohanim, disqualified in Levites, and there's something that's the opposite, which is works for Leviim, disqualified in kohanim. So now let's bring the braita before we try to explain it ourselves. The braita again explains it and then shows us the source. Tanu Rabanan, kohanim b'mumim psulin b'shanim kshirim, Leviim b'mumim kshirim b'shanim psulin. Okay, kohanim are disqualified if they're blemished. Levites are not disqualified if they're blemished. Kohanim have no specific age range. They're not limited in age, although we'll see they are, but not like the Levites. And the Levites are disqualified within certain ages. Okay, there's only a range of ages that the Levites can work in the temple. So, which we'll see what it is soon. Nimtza, so obviously, if we know this already, Nimtza kasher b'kohanim pasul b'Leviim, so what's good for kohanim, which is at all these other ages, is disqualified in Leviim. And what's kasher b'Leviim, which is even blemished Leviim, is pasul b'kohanim, doesn't work for kohanim. Min nahani mile, what's the source for this? Tanu Rabanan, quoting another braita now with the source. Zot asher, this time, by the way, we're not going to have, we will have a kavachomer, my mistake, we will. Okay, it's not as elaborate as the others. Zot asher leLeviim. So now we have this pasuk. Okay, this pasuk, okay, it's going to be confusing now when I want to access last week's parsha, all that, because we're now off in America and Israel for parshiot. Okay, so anyway, we're going to be in and around these parshiot. So we're going to start with this pasuk, Zot asher leLeviim. Okay, this is in Bamidbar, chapter 8, which is in Baalotcha. Okay, so for some of you, if you live in Israel, it's this coming week's parsha. Zot asher leLeviim. Now this is the rules for the Levites. Mi ben 5 ו-20 shana v'mala, from age 25 and up. Yavo litzvot tzava b'avodat ol moed. They're going to come work in ol moed. What did the Levites do? Let's talk about the list of their jobs. They carried the Mishkan in the desert. They also locked the temple. Okay, and they sang. Okay, so we're going to differentiate a little between the different avodot. but the different jobs. The next pasuk, just because we're going to get to it soon, is mi ben 50 shana, and once they get to age 50, yashuv mitzvah avodah v'lo yavod od. Okay, that's it. That's their limit. So we're going to see it's from 25 to 50. Now, if you're thinking, you might remember, it also says 30 somewhere else. It was actually in this past week's parsha. If you were in Israel, we read it yesterday. In Naso. So we're going to have to deal with that. That's a side point. But right now, let's just say it's from 25 to 50. And we're going to see these words, Zot Asher LeLeviim. Matamud Lamar. Why do you need those words? This is what is for the Levites. It's a bit of a strange way of saying it. What do we learn from this? Well, Lafi Shene'amar mi ben 50 shana yashuv, since we saw the upper limit is 50, Lamanu LeLeviim shashanim poslim bahem. So what do you see here? There's an age disqualification. You max out. So, Yachol, you might have thought, well, if you're limited by age, you might also be limited by blemishes. Yachol mumim poslim bahem. Maybe blemishes would limit you. And here comes our kal vachomer. Vidinu, and it would be logical, because ma kohanim she'ein hashanim poslim bahem, since age is not a disqualification for kohanim, and yet mumim poslim bahem, but blemishes are a disqualification. Leviim shashanim poslim bahem, so Levites, where there is an age knockout, disqualification, einodin she'emumim poslim bahem. Wouldn't you think then that the blemishes would disqualify them? Talmud lamar, that's why we have the word. It's really the word zot, but it's zot asher leLeviim, zot leLeviim ve'en acheret leLeviim. I guess it's really all three. Saying this is for the Levites, meaning this is the rule, and the only rule we have, the only limitation or disqualification is age, not more than that, okay? Not blemishes. Now, we're going to learn the fact that kohanim, okay, don't have an age disqualification is also going to be learned out from these three words. Yachol yua kohanim psulim bashanim. You might have thought kohanim are also disqualified by age for the same kind of kal vachomer. V'halo dinhu, right? At this point, you should be able to write the Gemara, right? What are you going to say? Well, uman leviim she'ein mumim poslim bahem. Levites are not disqualified by blemishes, and yet shanim poslim bahem, but are disqualified by age. So kohanim shamumim poslim bahem. If it says in the Torah the kohanim are blemished, can't work in the temple, ein odim. Wouldn't you think then obviously shiu shanim poslim bahem, that the age would be a disqualification? Talmud lamal asher leLeviim v'lo asher lekohanim. So first we said zot asher leLeviim. I mean, that's why I said it's really more a focus on the word zot. This is for the Levites, the disqualification. There's no blemish disqualification. Now the zot asher leLeviim. This is for the Levites, a disqualification, the age, because that's what it talked about in the pasuk, but not for kohanim. Okay, so there we have from those same words both. It was kind of similar to egla arufa. It just wasn't the same words, but it was the same type. That both were learned in the end from the context of the egla arufa, that this is exclusive to egla arufa and not for shrita, for para aduma. And this method is the only method to use for this egla arufa. It's the same thing we did here. This disqualification is the only disqualification for Levites, and it's only for Levites and not for kohanim. So with that, we get everything. Now there's one extra thing in the braita. From here, it's going to be different for the other sugyo because we're going to go off on these tangents. The first thing is the end of this braita. Yachol af b'shilo u'bebeit olamim ken. Now you might think that the disqualification of the Levites of age goes through not just when they were traveling in the desert and carrying the Mishkan from place to place, but even when they got to the place where it rested for a while, the Tabernacle or the Beit HaMikdash, maybe the same age disqualification would be effective, which you would have thought. Comes the braita and says, no. Why? Talmud lamal la'avod avodat avodah v'avodat masa. That's what we said in the first pasuk. Zod asher leLeviim, from the age of 25 to come litzvot tzava. No, it's not that one. Sorry. Second. It's a different pasuk. This is the ben shloshim shana v'mala one. Okay. Mi ben shloshim. This is actually in Bamidbar Daled. Okay. This was this past week. Mi ben shloshim shana v'mala va'a ben 50 shana kol haba la'avod avodat avodah b'masa avodat masa be'ol hamoed. So this says from 30 to 50 that they had to work to carry the stuff. Now you can see why 30 to 50, because it's physical, and it's hard to do physical labor when you get older. Okay, not to say anyone over 50, myself included, can't do anything, but it's harder, right? It's not as easy. So now, I don't know why 20 is not the age, because really at 20 they're pretty strong if you look at those army guys. But anyway, they did it was 30 to 50, or 25 to 50, which we're going to talk about soon. Don't worry, we're going to get there. So anyway, they say this is really for the heavy physical labor that was going on then. In the Mishkan, when it got to Shiloh, or in the temple, there was definitely no moving around. It was more singing and locking doors. For that, it doesn't really matter what age you are. So la amarti ela b'zman sh'avodah b'katef. So the drasha here is only when they're carrying things physically. We'll get to the singing and what the limit there is. It's a different limit. That's going to come up after. So now they go back, since we just quoted this pasuk that says 30 to 50, even though they didn't quote that part of the pasuk, but now they point out. So what we did so far is we had the classic braita that told us what the differences are, because the Mishna didn't. We had the braita that also said what the kavachor could have been and how we learned that it's mutually exclusive. But now we have to get off on a few tangents. Number one, we're going to talk about this contradiction. כתוב אחד אומר מבין 55 ו-20 שנה ומעלה, וכתוב אחד אומר מבין 30. So one says 25, one says 30. אי אפשר לומר 30 שכבר נאמר 5 ו-20, ואי אפשר לומר 5 ו-20 שכבר נאמר 30. That's just another way of saying the contradiction. I can't say 30 because it says 25, I can't say 25 because it says 30. So how do we do this? הכיצד, how does it work? 5 ו-20 לתלמוד ו-30 לעבודה. At 25 they would start training. Okay, whether it's training physically or training in terms of learning. Rashi says they learned the halachot about carrying all these important vessels. Okay, so whatever it was, maybe they were practicing physically. Okay, they were doing some sort of preparatory work to learn the trade, and then at age 30 they could actually do the work. Shloshim la'avodah. Mikan, now they're going to get off on a bit of a, zoom out. We can learn something from this. What do we learn from this? Very simple. Mikan l'talmid shelo ra'a siman yafeh b'mishnato 5 shanim, shuv eino ro'eh. I don't know if you can definitely learn it from here, but what they try to take here is an idea that if you're trying to learn, or really learn either Mishnato, like learning content of something, and you just don't get it after 5 years, time to give up, Or maybe learning a trade, But 5 years, you should give yourself 5 years, It takes time. It takes time to learn something. If after that you're really not understanding, maybe it's time to move on. I don't want to deter anyone from Daf Yomi learning or anything where it's 6 years. Don't worry, it's a lifelong process. So don't get discouraged by this Gemara. Okay, now, but I'm sure those who are learning 6 years can see, even if you don't feel like, okay, I've got this down pat completely, right? You see the improvement over all that time. However, there's a different opinion. Rabbi Yossi Omer, 3 shanim. He gives you only 3 years. Shene'amar u'legalam shanim 3 u'lelamdam sefer u'lashon kastim. This is from the beginning of Sefer Daniel, where Nebuchadnezzar wants some of the Jewish children. He wants to take some of these young boys, and he brings them to his palace, and he starts teaching them Sefer, books, and Lashon Kastim. He starts teaching them the Babylonian language. So what do you see here? He says, I want to train them for 3 years. It looks like their 3 years is the training period. So now they say, okay, well, why did Rabbi Yossi take that pasuk, and why the other opinion, the Tanakhama, take this pasuk? So idach shane lashon kastim de kalil. So the one who said 5 years says, yeah, by Nebuchadnezzar, that was easy to learn the Babylonian language. That only takes 3 years, but everything else, including the Levites and anything else, is really 5 years. That's the standard. This was the exception to the rule. And obviously we're now going to do the reverse for Rabbi Yossi. V'idach shani hilchot avoda de takifin. The hilchot avoda are hard to learn. Or the physical work is hard to learn how to do. You got to train your body. You got to train, that takes 5 years. So 2 different approaches as to which is the norm and which is the deviation. Okay, next, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to start learning, even though we said very clearly that there's no age limitation on kohanim, there actually is. It's just not, number one, written in the Torah, and it's not the same as 30 to 50 or 25 to 50 as the Levites, but there is an age limitation. Kohen shemivi, so there's a braita. Kohen shemivi shtei sa'arot ad sheyazkin kasher lavoda. So you need, right, we're not going to have babies in the temple working. You need to be shtei sa'arot, that's the usual age of maturity, 2 pubic hairs, usually around the age of 13. Right now, in those days, it was always, these physical signs, or for all sorts of mitzvot, right? There's a certain maturity that is expected. Nowadays, we always kind of put everything to bar bat mitzvah. But anyway, there it says, Mishavishte sarot, until sheyaskin, until you reach old age, or whatever that means, right? We all know that there's a wide range of what it means to reach old age. We're going to see that discussion in the Gemara as well. So, number one, Mishavishte sarot, until ad sheyaskin, kasher lavodah, that's the range according to this braita. Umumin poslimbo, we're back to, and blemished is disqualified kohen. Ben Levi, and this braita is also comparing, Ben Levi, mi ben 30 shana va'ad ben 50, kasher lavodah, from 30 to 50, ushanim poslimbo, and the age is a complete disqualification. Bamidbar amurim, this goes back to what we saw before also, for what is this said? Okay, it's a braita that basically overlaps. They're just adding the part about the kohanim age range. They're going back again and saying this is only ba'ol moed Bamidbar, it's only in the desert. Aval b'shilo u'bebeit olamim ein nifsalim ela b'kol. Now they add one other thing here too. What's going to be the issue if you don't have the right voice? Okay, what does it mean, the right voice? Well, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Mikra, where do you get this from? Turning now to Amabet. Vayihi ke'echad, sorry. Lamechatzitzlim u'lemeshorerim lashmiya kol echad. Okay, this is a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. Talks about the Levites singing, and they sang all in one voice. Okay, you have to be good in a choir to be able to keep your voice exactly like everyone else's. So you don't get disqualified for age, you get disqualified like I would for not having a good voice. Okay, I wouldn't be able to do that if I were a Levite in the temple. So, right, you'd have to basically have it that you have the same voice as the others. Okay, now we're going to go to the issue of old age, of aging. Ad sheyaskin. Ad kama. What's the limit here? Amar Rabbi El'ah, Amar Rabbi Chanina. Ad sheyiratet. Until you start, your hand starts trembling, your legs start trembling. You can imagine, you can't do the avoda if your hands are trembling. How are you going to, the blood's going to spill, all that kind of issue. So if you can't stand properly, you won't be able to walk, bring the things to where they need to go. So that's the limit. Tnanatan. Now we're going to bring a different sugya where it talks about age. But, okay, just because we're talking about age and an old age, so we're going to talk about what is defined as zikna in a different sugya. So the sugya here is about someone who has a seminal emission, a Baal Keri, and he goes to the mikvah. So Baal Keri shetaval velo hitil mayim. Now what happened here? He went to the mikvah after he had a seminal emission, but he hadn't urinated after the seminal emission. Now what's the problem? The problem is there might still be some semen inside. And when the person urinates, what will happen? Well, some of the semen will come out with the urine. It'll touch the person's body, which will make the person tameh again. So if they went to the mikvah without urinating before, right, since they had the seminal emission until they went to the mikvah, l'chishiyitol tameh, kishiyatil tameh. When they go and urinate after that, they're actually going to be impure because what's going to come out, as I said, the semen is going to come out and make the person impure. Rabbi Yossi says it depends on the person. Bechole ubezaken tameh. If the person's sick or elderly, then yes, because the concern is that when they had the seminal emission, not everything came out. But b'yeled ubebari tahor. But if it's a child or someone who's healthy, then, or a child who is healthy, right? In other words, then it's tahor. Now, if you notice here, they talk about a child and they talk about a zaken. There's a lot in between. So they want to know, yeled ad kama. So what age are we still called a yeled that we're going to say, okay, we can assume you're going to be tahor just by going to the mikvah, and when you urinate after, don't worry about it. Amar Rabbi El'ah, Amar Rabbi Chanina, the same people who were talking before and said it was shaking for the kohanim, right? Just like I said with age of maturity, it's different things for different mitzvot. Here also, it's different issues. So the age is going to be different. He's going to say here, it's maybe a little similar because if you're trembling, you won't be able to do this. But here he gives a test. How can you test if you're old? Okay, anyone who wants to can check this at home. If you stand on one leg, and you can take off your shoe and put on your shoe. Then, if you can still do that, then you're still considered a young person for this issue. Now, the funny part is, so basically, we have this Rabbi El'ah saying in the name of Rabbi Chanina, right? For our issue of Kuna, it's till you start trembling. The issue of Baal Keri, the issue is standing on one leg and being able to put your shoe on and take it off. And then it says, Amru alav Rabbi Chanina, this person who was quoted as making these statements, they said about him, Shaya ben shmonim shana, he was 80 years old, v'haya omer al reglo achat v'choletz medalo v'noel medalo, and he could do the shoe thing, okay? So he, right, what's funny is, what does he call old? Someone who was older than him, right? We know lots of people always, you always think, I used to think a certain age was old. Now that I'm at that age, I don't think it's so old anymore, right? So he didn't really view his age as so old because he could still do that, okay? Anyway, it's a good line. Amar Rabbi Chanina, and now he tells us what's the secret. Everybody always wants us to know the secret to how to age well. So he says, Chamin v'shemen, the hot water and oil, sheschatani imi b'yalduti, that my mother anointed me with, put on my body when I was young. Hein amduli be'etzik nuti. Okay, that's what kept me young, even when I'm old. Okay, like he knew that he was a phenomenon, okay, of someone who could be old and still very active. Okay, moving on now. But we're still on the topic of elderly people, but here it's not really elderly. Okay, we're talking about what age requirement. Really, we're now getting to the minimum age. Okay, so before we get to our topic of what's the minimum age, which we saw already is shtei sarot, but now we're going to see there's a machloket. But first we're going to talk about, this braita talks about certain things that you need a different criteria, not shtei sarot, 2 pubic hairs, but nitmalez kano. When your beard starts growing in, okay, or gets full, when you grow a full beard, which we know is different age range for different men, then already ra'ui le'asot shliach tzibor v'leived lifnei hateva, you can be a chazan, and, well, this is a little weird, because the word shliach tzibor means to be a chazan, and the word leived lifnei hateva also means to be a chazan. So some people say that it's what is defining the other, that's what it means to be a shliach tzibor. Some people think shliach tzibor means a message, what it literally means, right? We call chazan a shliach tzibor. But a shliach tzibor could be anyone who does something for the community. He could be a shliach beitin. He could be the guy who brings the subpoenas around to people, or work in the court, administer the lashes. There's all different kinds of things that someone can be a shliach tzibor, a messenger of the community. And maybe that's what it means in Yerei Lefnei HaTeva, means to be a chazan, to daven, do Shmona Esrei for everyone. Ulisat kapav, and to do berkat kohanim. Okay, so for that, it's not enough to have 2 sarot. For those 3 things, you need to have a beard, a full beard. Me'imatai kasher la'avodah. Okay, now they get to our topic. This is why we quoted this braita, because the braita then gets to, okay, well, when can you do the avodah in the temple? The kohanim. Mishayavi shtei sarot. Okay, that's what we saw before. This says the same thing. But now we have a different opinion. Rebbe Omer ani, I say, ad shei ben esrim. I think you have to be 20 to do the avodah. So Amar Rav Chisda is going to try to bring a pasuk support for this, for Rebbe, and then we're going to see what the machloket is about how each of them read this pasuk. My time at the Rebbe, d'chtiv, vaya'amidu et haleviim miben 20 shana v'mala, l'natzech al melechet beit Hashem. So this is a pasuk from Ezra, which says that they put up the Leviim who were 20. What they mean by Leviim here are really kohanim, and the Gemara will say so in a minute. But they put up the kohanim from the age of 20 and up. L'natzech al melechet Hashem. What this l'natzech is a good question. In Hebrew, modern Hebrew, l'natzech is the job of a conductor, right, where he leads everybody in the in a symphony. So it's the same kind of idea, to be in charge of the melacha b'beit Hashem. So what do you see here? Well, the kohanim started at age 20. So if they started at age 20 in the time of Ezra, there's your proof, only from age 20. V'idach l'natzech shani. Now the one who says, no, this isn't, right, this is l'natzech, this is to be in charge. There's being in charge, and there's working, right? You could do the avoda. This was just the people who were 20 and up were able to be in charge. You can't have a 13-year-old be in charge of kohanim in the temple. That wouldn't be appropriate, right? So there's a debate about how to understand this l'natzech. Is it only the people orchestrating things? Or is it people who are, right, and basically being in charge of others? Or is it doing any of the work? So Rebbe says this is doing any of the work they're talking about, and therefore we mean, at age 20 is the limit, as, right, you have to be at least 20. There's a minimum age. Wait, but it says the Levites. It doesn't say the kohanim. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, no. As Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, there's 24 places in the Torah where kohanim are called Levites. Makes sense. Kohanim were from Shevet Levi. They're also Levites. So even though it says Levites or Leviim, it really means kohanim. There's 24 places. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi quotes us one of them, not our pasuk. HaKohanim HaLeviim B'nei Tzadok. It says, why do you quote this one? Because this one says, the Kohanim, the Levites, right? It calls the Kohanim Levites. So basically, for the fact that it calls the Kohanim Levites, Levites obviously means Kohanim in that pasuk, the sons of Tzadok who were Kohanim. So therefore it means also by us. This is one of the places that Rabbi Shua ben Levi was referring to where it actually says Levites, but it really means Kohanim. Okay, so we have this pasuk from Ezra. Okay, so it's not necessarily the greatest proof, but we have this pasuk from Ezra, which leads us to say perhaps 20 or maybe not. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to have another braita. Ish mizaracha ledorotam. Okay, what's the context of this pasuk? This is talking about an ish who's a kohen, mizaracha. It's talking to Aaron. It says, Daber al Aharon lemor, say to Aaron, this is in Vayikra chapter 21. Ish mizaracha ledorotam, a person from your zera, meaning a kohen, in future generations, or in all the generations, asher yeh bomum, who has a blemish, lo yikrav lakriv lechem Elohav, can't work in the temple. What are they going to learn from this? Mikan amar Rabbi Elazar, katan pasul la'avodah va'afilu tam. Now, where do we get? Because we really said there's no age limitation for kohanim, but what they're trying to get to is, well, there is an age limitation, both minimum and maximum. Now, it's much wider range than the Levites, who are only from 30 to 50. This is from age of puberty or 20 till old age, but there is still a limit, and where do we get it from? So here they say, what does the pasuk say? A person, an ish, who's usually someone who's already a gadol, not a katan, not a minor, an ish who has a blemish can't work. What do you learn from there? If you don't have a blemish, right, a filu tam, right, but if you're a katan, only, what's it teaching you? If you have a blemish, then you can't work as an ish, but if you're not blemished, you can work, but only as an ish, not as a minor. So therefore, you learn that a minor, even if he doesn't have a blemish, that's what it means, afilu tam, even if he doesn't have a blemish, he's complete, he still can't do the avoda. So that's the source that a katan can't do it. Me'matai kasher la'avoda, mishavi shtei sa'arot. So now the braita says, just like we saw before, the one opinion, right, against Rebbe, when you have 2 pubic hairs, that's the minimum age. Aval, and that's learned from Ish. Aval echav kohanim em nichinot lavod ad sheyeh ben 20. But his fellow kohanim, even though there's no problem to work from the age of 13, the other kohanim don't really want, okay, I'll put it like this and I think you'll understand, don't really want teenagers in the temple. They're still immature, okay, they're not really there yet, and they don't want them doing the avodah in the temple. It was just not appropriate, right? I'm going to do a sacrifice, and then I have this little, 15-year-old doing, no offense if anyone's listening, they're 15, right? But this is the temple, they didn't trust the teenagers to be doing the avodah in the temple. Now, it sounds like there's not really an issue from it, technically speaking, but it just didn't feel right to the achav kohanim. Now, the question is, this is going to be the debate right now, is this Rebbe's opinion? When Rebbe said 20, is that what he meant? That really 20 is the age because of the achiv kohanim? Or is this within the rabbi's position? And Rebbe thinks, okay, we're going to see right now, I'll read it, and then you'll see. So, Ikeda Amrei, some people say, Ha Rebbe, this is Rebbe's position. So when Rebbe said 20, it was really afilu psul derabanan lately. There's really no, right, forget about no Torah obligation to be 20. There's not even a rabbinic obligation to be 20. It's just that the other kohanim just didn't feel like this was right. V'ikeda Amrei, some people say, no, Rebbe le psul derabanan. Rebbe thinks 20 is the age by rabbinic law. Okay, nobody thinks by Torah law because it never says it. But he thinks by rabbinic law, 20 is the age. And this source that says, yes, 2 sa'arot, but the kohanim didn't want it, that's all the rabbi's position. That's not Rebbe at all. Rebbe thinks by rabbinic law it's a problem. V'ha rabbananhi. And what the rabbis are saying are, yes, it's true, you could do it from shtei sa'arot, but lechatchilahu delo, you really shouldn't do it ideally, because it bothers the other kohanim. Aval diavad, aval tutok shara, but if you were to do it anyway, the work would be effective. Okay, so there you have 2 different approaches as to what the age 20 is that Rebbe instituted. Is it a psul derabanan, or is it just this added thing about the kohanim, and then this machloket about whether this braita that we just quoted with the age 20, is that Rebbe's position or is it the rabbi's position? Okay, new Mishna. Our last topic for today, which we're only really going to get started on. Tahor b'kli cheres, tamei b'kol hakelim, tahor b'kol hakelim, tamei b'kli cheres. Okay, the way you make an earthenware vessel impure is not the way that you make other vessels impure. So the way it becomes impure is not true for other vessels. And the way other vessels become impure is not true about earthenware vessel. So now we're going to see Tanu Rabbanan. So again, we're going to have the braita that goes into what is the difference and where do we get it from. Avir kli cheres tamei v'gabo tahol. Okay, we've learned this a bunch of times, although not for a while. If you have an earthenware vessel and a sheretz, a creepy crawler, dead sheretz, comes into the airspace, let's say it's hanging on a string, and it drops down into the airspace of the vessel, but never touches the sides of the vessel. Okay? So that is impure. Now I'll read you the pasuk. Kol kli cheres asher yipol mehem el tocho, kol asher b'tocho yitma v'oto tishboru. So a kli cheres that falls from them until inside of it, right? Whatever is inside, there's two things about being inside. Okay, it's also if something falls inside the airspace, and it's also if something is in the airspace. Let's say there's some food in the airspace of the vessel. What happens is if the sheretz comes in, it makes the vessel impure. Okay, so a sheretz is an avatuma. Avatuma makes a rishon. It makes it could make a person impure. It could make a vessel impure. So the vessel becomes a rishon. The vessel can make only food and drink, but if there's food and drink in the vessel, and not only sitting in the vessel, even hanging in the airspace of the vessel, it's also going to be impure. Okay, we didn't say that yet, but we're going to say it in a minute, so I'm already telling you. So the avir of kli cheres is tamei. So again, if the sheretz comes into the airspace without touching the vessel at all, it's impure. But gabo tahor, if it touches, usually touching makes everything impure, touches the outside of the vessel. Okay, we all know what the outside of a vessel is. It touches the outside, it's not impure. Only because the pasuk said tocho, only things inside either airspace or touching inside. But if it's outside, it doesn't make it tahor. Touches what we call the walls of the vessel. Avir kol kelim tahor v'gaban tamei, and it's the exact opposite in other vessels. In other vessels that aren't earthenware, if it just goes into the airspace without touching, not tamei, and if it touches the outside, it's actually impure. Nimtza tahor b'kli cheres tamei b'kol kelim, tahor b'kol kelim tamei b'kli cheres. Right. So what's tahor in an earthenware vessel, like touching the outside, is tamei, is impure in other vessels, and what's tahor in the other vessels is tamei in a kli cheres. So menahani mile, where do we get this from? Okay, we're going to be left a little unsatisfied today because we're going to base this on something that we're not going to yet see until tomorrow's daf. Ditanu Rabbanan tocho. So now we have, if you remember, I showed you in that pasuk it says tocho twice. One about what goes inside to make it impure, and the other is what's inside the kli that becomes impure. So tocho afal pi shelo naga. So this means, right, anything that falls, that's the first tocho, actually pol, falls into the vessel in the tocho even without touching. Ata omer afal pi shelo naga, elam ke naga. What do you mean? Just because it goes inside. If I would tell you something went inside a vessel, you probably assume it falls to the bottom, right? Gravity. So where'd you get that even if it's in the airspace without touching it? Rabbi Yonatan ben of Tumus Omel, Ne'emar tocho l'tamei v'ne'emar tocho litamei. So it says tocho in two contexts in that pasuk. One is litamei, to make other things impure, meaning the food in the vessel. That was the second one. And the first one is to make the vessel itself impure. That's litamei, that the vessel itself becomes impure rather than the vessel can pass on impurity to something else. Ma tocho ha'amor litamei, afal pi shelo naga. Now, when the vessel can make the food in the vessel impure, when the vessel's a rishon and the food becomes a sheni, then, right, those are just degrees of impurity. So that happens even if the food isn't touching the vessel. The problem is we don't know why that is. That's going to be the next tomorrow's question. We're going to get to that tomorrow. But since they know that to be the case, that when the food becomes impure from the vessel that became impure from the sheretz, so that's even if the food's not touching the vessel. So therefore, right, just like that tocho is litamei, even though it didn't touch, af tocho ha'amor litamei, also the vessel itself becoming impure, afal pi shelo naga, even though it doesn't touch. Okay, so we're left a little, like I said, a little up in the air, no pun intended there, but hataminala, and the Gemara is going to say, how do you know that about the food, that it could be also hanging in the airspace without and will be impure? So that we're going to get to Amar B'Yonatan, and we're going to basically continue with that tomorrow, and then we'll understand this a little bit better. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with the para aduma and the egla arufa, para b'shlita, egla b'arifa, and not one for the other. We tried to prove the shchita is the only way to do for paraduma. You can't do arufa from the word chukah, but in the end we proved that doesn't work. And in the end they learned both of them from the egla arufa, from different times where it uses the ha'yidiyah, the definite principle, to stress this is the only way to do it for this, right? This is the only way to do it for the egla arufa, and also you can't use this for anything else, this method. Then we went to kasher b'kohanim pasul b'leviim, kasher b'leviim pasul b'kohanim. This one was a bit longer because we got off on a bunch of tangents. We started with, right, the age range for the Levites is not true for the kohanim, although later we got to, but there is an age range for kohanim, and we got into some machloket about that, and also there was a bit of a lack of clarity. What is too old, right, and what is, right, from there we got to too old in other areas as well. And then we also talked about the minimum age. We eventually got to, right, besides getting into these two differences and where it all comes from in the pasuk, and what the kavachomer you could have made and why you can't make the kavachomer, and learn from one to the other about the blemishes and about the age range. But then we also got into this age 20 that Rebbe points out, right, versus Shtei Sa'arot, and what the machloket is Rebbe's derabanan issue, or is it just because the kohanim didn't want them, or is that really the rabbi's position that actually Shtei Sarot is fine, but they kind of limited it ideally because the other kohanim weren't happy with having all these teenagers in the temple. Okay, then we got to the last topic, which was the way that a kli cheres, an earthenware vessel, becomes impure through the airspace, and actually not by touching the outside, is the exact opposite in other vessels, and we'll get more into this in tomorrow's daf. With that, wishing everyone a good day and a good week. Shavua tov.